Thank you. So just a little bit about me to start with. So I'm a solicitor by profession. I practice in personal injury and medical negligence law, so nothing to do with sports. But sport's a big hobby of mine. It's something I'm involved with outside of work, and it's something that takes up quite a large part of my time. So at the moment, I play for Spencer Ladies Cricket Club in South London, in Earlsfield. So we have a women's first 11 and a women's second 11. So the first 11 play in the Premiership Women's Cricket Southern League, which is the top club division, so you can't go above that, so they're pretty good. We also have a girls team, a boys team, and several men's teams as well. I've been with them since around 2012. I also play cricket at work, so we have a social team at work. It consists largely of men. I'm the only woman that's played on the team, probably since its incorporation, I think. So it's usually 10 men plus me, which is fun. I think a number of you will be aware that there's been some prominent British Muslims involved in sport, probably over the past decade. So Mo Farah, Moeen Ali, Adil Rashid. Some women include Khadija Safari in kickboxing, Salma B in cricket. You may not have heard of them as much. They don't get as much coverage. To start with, I'd like to talk about my journey into sport and how I got into sport, essentially. So I come from a Pakistani family. I grew up in Birmingham. I have 4 siblings, so 2 brothers and 2 sisters. I'm the middle child. Growing up, my brothers and my dad were interested mainly in football and cricket. So my dad was a Manchester United supporter. I naturally also became a Manchester United supporter, and they followed the Pakistan cricket team quite religiously, including my mum actually. My sisters, neither of my sisters were interested in sport in the slightest. But from the age of around 6 onwards, I just grew up with a huge interest in sport. I spent a lot of my childhood sitting in front of the TV with my dad watching football, but equally a lot of my time in the back garden with my little brother playing football and cricket. One of my earliest memories is the Cricket World Cup. I think I was around 10 years old. Probably at that age, I think it was the craziest I've been about the cricket team, Pakistan cricket team. And I remember my brother wanted a Pakistan t-shirt, and I also really wanted a Pakistan t-shirt. And my mum said, "Why on earth do you want a Pakistan t-shirt?" But I kept on at it, and we both got cricket t-shirts. And it was probably the best present I've ever got at that time. So sport was never something that was encouraged growing up. It was never something I had the opportunity to play at club level as I was growing up. I didn't have any knowledge of any local teams or clubs in my area, actually. But at the same time, I'd say it wasn't anything that was actively discouraged either. So it was just something that wasn't a extracurricular activity. The only extracurricular activity I had was mosque classes. At school, so at primary and secondary school, PE was probably my favourite sport. But again, the schools I went to didn't have any clubs that really played sports. The only club that was present in terms of girls was basketball. And being a little short, I didn't really qualify for that. Then I went on to university, and in my first week, I went to the Freshers' Fair. And in their sports hall, there was literally tons of teams to pick from. I automatically went to the cricket team, and I signed up to join them. And I played cricket for 3 years with the University of Birmingham Cricket Club. I also tried other sports socially. So during my time at university, I played badminton, I played football, and I tried to learn how to play tennis as well. I left university in around 2009, and then I joined a local cricket club. I was quite surprised to find there were quite a few teams in my area that did women's teams, and I joined one in 2012, and I played for them until I left to come to London for work. So I think sport can play an important role in breaking down social barriers and promoting cultural dialogue. I wanted to set out what I mean by integration when I'm talking about sport. So what I'm referring to is the mixing of cultures. I'm referring to accommodating and accepting cultural diversity and having respect for different practices and beliefs. What I'm not talking about is assimilation. So I'm not talking about adopting a different culture and letting go of part of your own identity or culture in the process. So what do I mean by going beyond integration? For me, it's having a sense of belonging. So it's being able to say, this is home, this is where I have a community, an emotional attachment, and a sense of safety. I think a potential difficulty has been having a hybrid identity. So I consider myself to be British Pakistani, and sometimes that can result in cultural clashes, and it's finding the balance between the two. So how can sport contribute to integration, and what are the benefits? As I said before, sport can be used as a tool for social integration by breaking down social barriers. I think when playing sport, things like race, language, social class can to an extent become irrelevant, because all that matters really is your ability to play that sport. Sport can also provide values such as teamwork and discipline. It's also often a non-political domain. I think it can help challenge gender stereotypes as well, especially when it comes to the role of women. It's obviously got proven mental health benefits, physical benefits as well. In terms of Muslims, I think sport can increase the visibility of Muslims and challenge typical stereotypes that exist when it comes to Muslims in the UK. So British Muslims, I don't feel, are visible in sport to the extent they should be. So we do have individuals in sports like cricket and boxing in the past decade, but beyond that, I think there's limited numbers that are actually visible and that you could actually name. I think we need to have more representation of Muslims to change the narrative that we see, especially in mainstream media, and I think sport can be a positive form of representation. If any of you are interested, there's currently a study or attempt to have a study in Europe whereby migrants will be integrated in local communities through sport. It's awaiting funding, I believe, so if they get the funding, it'll be interesting to see to what extent, if at all, that succeeds. I would like to highlight my own experience and whether sport has allowed me or helped me to integrate. So, as I said, my parents are from a Pakistani background. So they were both born in Pakistan. They married. My older two siblings were born in Pakistan, and then they moved to Birmingham, and I was born. So I consider myself to be a second-generation immigrant. Growing up, Birmingham, if any of you have been, is quite a diverse area. So you will find pockets of communities that are actually filled with just majority Pakistani or Bengali or Arab. But the area we grew up in was actually quite mixed. Having said that, all our family friends were Pakistani. The only non-Pakistani people we knew were our neighbours, and even then I wouldn't say they were friends, they were just our neighbours. Again, in school and college, whilst they were mixed places, what you often found was people clung to their own ethnic groups. So all my friends were either British, Indian, Pakistani or Bengali. Whilst I had classmates who were not from those backgrounds, I didn't actually mix with them in social spaces. When I started playing cricket, however, it was quite different. So often I'd be the only ethnic minority or one of few ethnic minorities in the team. And I think it was my first real experience of mixing beyond a sort of superficial level with people from other backgrounds. I feel personally that I've shared some of my culture whilst playing cricket and learnt a bit more, I'd like to think, about other cultures as well. So For instance, cricket falls in the season between May and around August, September. Often in that period, Ramadan will generally fall or has been falling in the past few years. And if I'm selected to play a game and it's Ramadan, I will be fasting. So I always let my teammates know I'm fasting, I won't be able to run as much, and please put me in the field where the ball's basically not going to come to me. And actually they're very accommodating. There's always a dialogue, there's always questions, how long do you fast, when can you eat, when was the last time you've eaten, can you drink water, etc. And I think to me, I always find that a positive experience. I think it opens a dialogue, and I think otherwise sometimes people can feel uncomfortable or intrusive asking those questions, but in that environment I think there's a sense of it's a valid sort of topic that we can discuss because I'm fasting and I'm playing sport, so these are all reasonable questions. And just the team I play at the moment actually I think is very diverse, so there's a lot of British, English women, but there's also me, there's an Indian, there's a French woman, we've got South Africans and Australians, so it's entirely mixed, which I think is great.
A French person playing cricket?
Yeah, there's a French cricket team as well, yeah, international, yeah. I think if we're talking about participation in sport, then it's only right we also talk about the barriers to participation in sport when it comes to Muslims. So first of all, culture and religion, or culture or religion, can be a barrier. In my own experience, I feel there's no universal definition of British Islamic culture. For me, it's diverse. So when I'm referring to barriers, I'm not saying they're universal over the whole community, but there are pockets of it that I've seen. So that's what angle I'm coming from. I think what is universal is that there's a lack of participation by ethnic minorities in sport. Quite recently, there's been studies which have shown that ethnic minority women are less likely to participate in sport than ethnic minority men. Sadly, there are still people and communities who will say that women shouldn't play sport, that sport is just not for women. Why? What do they gain from playing sport? There's views that women shouldn't mix with men. That can sometimes be a barrier. If a woman wants to play a sport and she's not allowed to mix with men at all, in terms of coaching and training, sometimes teams are mixed. How does she go about doing that? There can be restrictions in dress code. So, for example, wearing shorts or showing your hair. I think in recent times there has been more visibility of women playing sport in hijab, so we've seen at probably the past 2 Olympics that's been much more prominent and highlighted, especially in the media. Gender roles and responsibilities can be a barrier, I think, as well. So if women are confined to marriage and raising children and looking after the household, there can be little time in between that for them to then go out and play a sport, whether that's competitive or just social. I think networks can also be a barrier. So if you don't know anyone who's also interested in sport, how do you then go and, join a club? It can be a little bit harder to then make that first move. Racism can sometimes be a barrier. I think facilities and resources as well. So if you join a local club, does it cost anything to join? Is it free? Are you going to have to buy equipment? How far is it? How are you going to get there? These are also barriers. And finally, I think role models are also potentially a barrier, because when I was growing up, I can't think of any British Muslim women that were out there playing sport that I could say, wow, yeah, she's doing that, I'd like to have a go. And I think that's definitely a barrier. In terms of organisations, I've come across 2 organisations in the UK that encourage participation in sport or try and make Muslims more visible in sport. One is the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation, and the other is the Muslim Sport Council. So sport can have many benefits. It can help integration, it can help break down barriers, but we need to break down the barriers within our own communities to help us participate in sport in the first instance. One potential way to break barriers, I think, is through education. So encouraging participation in sport when you're at primary school and secondary school, I think that can be of benefit. I also think people of my generation have a responsibility to encourage your cousins, your friends, your siblings, nieces, nephews, your children to participate in sport, to teach them about the benefits in sport. That's not to say I criticise my parents' generation. I think, especially my own parents, they had limited access to education. They had no access to sport, so I don't think it's fair or reasonable to say they should have encouraged me to play when they just had no knowledge of what the benefits of sport are. So just to conclude, I think if we can increase participation in sport, we can make Muslim women and men more visible in the mainstream. Thank you.